I remember that evening with the kind of clarity one wishes could be blurred by time. The rehearsal dinner was held in the grand ballroom of a Manhattan hotel, all chandeliers and silver cutlery polished until they nearly blinded you. I had dressed in the dark blue suit my tailor swore made me look like an executive. Truth was, I felt like a nervous boy about to spend the inheritance my grandparents left me on a marriage I thought was safe. That inheritance, one Fehai Trio Dola placed in a trust, had always felt heavy in my hands. I excused myself midway through the dinner. Too many toasts, too much champagne, and too many smiles stretched thin over lies. I needed air. That is how I ended up on the terrace glass doors, cracked just enough for me to hear the laughter floating from the corner table, where my fiancée sat with her friends. Morgan, my bride to be, leaned against the table with her glass raised. Her cheeks were flushed, her lipstick uneven. I bet $10,000 he'll still marry me even after I slept with someone in his bed. The sentence slid out of her mouth as if it were the punchline to a harmless joke. The table roared. One of her friends wheezed. "You mean Jordan? He's basically an ATM with feelings." They howled again, bracelets clinking as they slapped the table. I froze my hand. Tightening on the thin black folder I carried inside were the last seating arrangements I had been obsessing over. That folder suddenly weighed like a stone. I slipped my phone from my pocket thumb-tapping record almost without thought. Her voice, their laughter, the cruelty of it all went into that tiny device. "You think he'll notice?" another voice teased. Morgan rolled her eyes. "Notice, please. He's desperate to lock this down. I could show up late with someone else's perfume on me, and he'd still walk me down the aisle. That money is as good as mine." A hush came over me that had nothing to do with silence. The kind of hush that settles inside your ribs when the truth arrives too sharp to swallow. My life, my name, even the country estate my grandparents once called their pride, had all been reduced to collateral in a drunken wager. I stood there, fingers tight around that folder, staring through the glass as though I were invisible. They laughed and no one thought to look my way. I walked back inside, placed the folder neatly on the table, and joined the dinner again. My voice when I toasted was steady, my smile polite. Only the phone in my pocket knew the truth. Later, when the plates were cleared and the band played something soft, I lingered near the window. My reflection looked older, lonelier. I thought of my grandparents, two people who had worked 40 years to build a business, then left me their estate with the hope I'd use it for love for a family. Instead, here I was listening to strangers measure my worth in $10,000 bets. The night carried on with false laughter. I poured myself another glass of wine and nodded along invisible to the very people who should have known me best. My fiancée clinked glasses again, louder this time, her laugh echoing across the ballroom. Inside me, something small but sharp took root, a calm kind of rage patient as stone. I will explain more in a moment. This part matters. Tell me where you are watching from and hit subscribe. We need to talk about families, money, and what betrayal can cost. The morning after the rehearsal dinner, New York felt heavier. The usual hum of taxis and street vendors outside my apartment was there, but I heard it through a fog. I brewed coffee, I didn't drink, stared at my phone, and pressed play on the recording again. Her voice filled the kitchen clear as glass. "I bet $10,000. Every time my stomach clenched tighter. It is one thing to suspect someone might not value you. It is another to hear it confirmed in their own words. I thought about the inheritance again, how my grandparents had worked decades, then trusted me with what they left behind. I had planned to build a family, maybe even buy a country place of my own one day. Instead, the woman meant to share my life saw me as nothing but leverage for a cruel game. By noon, I was back at the office pretending to review financial statements. My colleagues joked around, asked about the big day, and I answered politely. No one noticed the folder tucked in my briefcase with printouts of hotel receipts I had found hidden in our shared desk at home. They told stories too precise to belong to a business trip, dates and times that lined up with Morgan's spin class schedule. I printed them, stacked them neat, slid them into the folder. The next day brought more. An email left open on our laptop by accident, or maybe arrogance. "Last night was amazing. Same time tomorrow." It was signed with an initial I didn't recognize, but the tone was unmistakable. I printed that too, filed it with the receipts. Each piece of evidence was a nail hammered deeper into the coffin of the life I thought I had. The hardest blow came when I met Ava, Morgan's younger sister. We sat in a quiet cafe, uptown, steam rising from untouched cups. She looked pale before I even spoke. "Your sister's cheating on me," I said flatly. Her hands shook. "I know," she whispered. "She told me it was over. She swore she would stop before the wedding." I slid my phone across the table, pressed play. Ava covered her mouth, eyes wide, as Morgan's drunken voice poured out. $10,000. ATM with feelings. The cafe noise around us faded. "She bet on you." Ava's face turned crimson, then white again. "I thought I was protecting her, Jordan. I thought family meant, I can't believe this." For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then I said the only thing that mattered, "Help me." She nodded without hesitation. Whatever you need? That was the moment the betrayal stopped being mine alone. It became ours. I walked home that night through Central Park, the city glowing around me. People strolled with coffee cups, children chased pigeons, couples laughed as though trust was a given thing. I moved among them like a ghost carrying receipts, emails, recordings, pieces of a puzzle I had never asked to assemble. Morgan texted later, "Don't forget cake tasting tomorrow." I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. I typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." What she didn't know was that I would attend with a smile, a calm mask stretched over fury. She believed I was blind. In truth, I was cataloging every lie, every slip, every careless grin. I will tell you how the mask held and how we began to build something far more dangerous than silence. But that comes in the next chapter. From that day forward, I learned the art of performance. To the world, I was the eager groom. To Morgan, I was the doting fiancé. I posted photographs on social media countdowns, pictures of us tasting cake, smiling at floral arrangements. Friends liked and commented dream couple. And so happy for you both. Behind the glow of those screens, I was archiving lies. Every evening after Morgan drifted off to bed with her phone in hand, I gathered pieces. Credit card slips she shoved carelessly into drawers. Late-night messages she forgot to delete, even a pair of earrings that weren't hers, tucked into the wrong jewelry box. I treated them all like exhibits for a trial. They went into the black folder, thickening week by week. Ava was my unexpected ally. To Morgan, she played the supportive sister, nodding when Morgan bragged about Rodrigo, the yoga instructor who had become more than a hobby. Ava even feigned amusement when Morgan whispered about the bet swelling to $16,000 after her friends doubled down. "Too easy," Morgan laughed once, twirling her wine glass. "I almost feel bad taking their money." Ava told me everything afterward, her voice tight with disgust. "She doesn't even see you as a person anymore, just a game piece." We began to meet regularly. Sometimes it was under the pretense of wedding planning, tasting cakes, or choosing fabric for bridesmaid dresses. Other times it was quiet walks along the Hudson, our conversations hushed but charged. What started as strategy meetings soon carried an undercurrent. Neither of us named. Resentment, shared trust rebuilt in a strange new direction. Meanwhile, Morgan's arrogance blossomed. One evening she had Rodrigo pick her up in his bright yellow car parked right in front of our apartment building. Mrs. Lang, the elderly neighbor who watered her flowers religiously, saw everything. She asked me sweetly if my car was in the shop since a young man kept driving Morgan around. I smiled, said something about carpooling for the environment, and she nodded, though her eyes said she didn't believe a word. At work, I doubled down on normalcy. Colleagues asked how wedding preparations were going, and I replied with practiced enthusiasm. I carried photographs of venues, spoke about floral budgets, even laughed about in-laws. Inside, the anger settled into a cold, patient resolve. Betrayal had stripped me of innocence, but it had gifted me clarity. Ava and I grew closer through it all. She was nothing like her sister, genuine, attentive, quietly fierce. She wanted Morgan to face consequences as much as I did. Still, we kept boundaries clear. The plan mattered more than anything personal between us. Or so we told ourselves. Each night before sleep, I'd replay the original recording. Her voice, that smug declaration about $10,000, reminded me why the mask had to hold, why the performance had to be flawless. Morgan was planning a wedding. I was planning a reckoning. And yet the higher she raised her glass, the harder the fall was coming. The morning of the wedding dawned clear, sharp as glass. Manhattan had that rare kind of September sky, neither heavy with summer heat nor dulled by autumn haze. I dressed slowly in the hotel suite provided for me, cufflinks glinting against a starched shirt. The suit felt heavier than it should, but not from nerves, from purpose. The ballroom downstairs had been transformed, overnight rows of ivory chairs, a floral arch dripping with roses, chandeliers casting warm light across crystal glasses. Guests arrived in sleek black cars, women in gowns that shimmered, men with watches that cost more than some people's homes. It was the kind of wedding Morgan had always craved, extravagant enough to impress her circle, expensive enough to prove she had won. I watched from the side as Morgan entered her dress, a cascade of lace and glitter. Applause rippled through the crowd, phones lifted for photographs. She basked in it, chin-high eyes sweeping the room like a queen, surveying loyal subjects. Rodrigo, of course, was not in sight. He would never be invited here. But I could see the way she touched her necklace, one I hadn't bought, that her secret life wasn't far from her mind. The ceremony began, words spoken, vows rehearsed. I repeated my lines smoothly, my voice calm. No one suspected a thing. The guests smiled, clinked glasses, whispered about how beautiful we looked together. To them, it was a perfect union sealed by fortune and family. Then came the reception. The band struck up something lively, waiters circled with champagne flutes, and the laughter grew louder as the evening deepened. Morgan's friends huddled near the front, their eyes glittering with more than wine. They were waiting for the moment she would collect her winnings, the joke none of them thought could be exposed. When the master of ceremonies invited me to give a toast, I stepped forward. A hush fell. The microphone felt cool in my hand. Behind me on the massive projection screen, the slideshow of childhood photographs had been quietly replaced with a different file, the one stored in my black folder. I lifted my glass. To love, I began, voice steady. To trust, to loyalty, to honesty. The screen flickered. Morgan smiled, nodding, raising her glass as though she were the star of a play. Then her own voice filled the ballroom. I bet $10,000 he'll still marry me even after I slept with someone in his bed. The room froze. Glasses hung in the air. A ripple of shock spread from table to table. The laughter on the screen, her laughter, her friends' voices calling me an ATM with feelings echoed through the speakers. Morgan's face drained of color. She spun toward me, lips parting, but the recording rolled on, more mockery, more casual cruelty, the full weight of her betrayal laid bare for everyone she had hoped to impress. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Some gasped, others stared openly, their champagne untouched. The wealthy aunt from Connecticut covered her mouth with a trembling hand. My colleagues from the firm leaned forward, eyes sharp. Even the hotel staff froze mid-step, trays balanced in disbelief. When the video ended, silence filled the hall. Morgan whispered, "Jordan, stop this," but her voice shook. I set the microphone down, the sound echoing like a gavel. "This," I said quietly, "is what loyalty means to her." The hush was suffocating, broken only by the clink of a single glass being set down too hard. Morgan stammered, eyes darting toward her friends, but they looked away. The bet, the money, the game, they had all been dragged into light. But the real twist wasn't the video. It was what happened next. The silence after the video played was a silence I will never forget. You could almost hear the chandeliers humming. Morgan stood there, dress gleaming under the ballroom, lights, her perfect image cracking with every breath she took. The smug tilt of her chin was gone. In its place was a kind of frantic, pleading eyes darting toward her friends, her parents, anyone who might save her. But no one moved. I picked up the microphone again. My pulse was steady, calmer than I expected. "I was supposed to marry today," I said, my voice carrying across the room. "And I still will." Gasps broke the stillness. Morgan blinked at me, confused, certain she had misheard. Then I turned slowly toward the side of the stage where Ava stood in her bridesmaid's gown. She looked at me with wide, steady eyes, then stepped forward. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some guests leaned forward in disbelief, others whispered behind manicured hands. But Ava did not falter. She joined me at the center, her hand slipping into mine as if it belonged there all along. "You can't be serious," Morgan hissed, stepping closer, her voice ragged. "This is a joke. Jordan, stop humiliating me." I faced her fully. "Humiliation," I said, "is something you brought on yourself. Bets, lies, affairs, you turned our life into entertainment." But I refused to play the fool. I signaled to the officiant. He hesitated only a moment before opening a fresh folder, one Ava and I had arranged in secret days before. Marriage license, rings, all in place. The plan had never been just to expose Morgan. It had been to reclaim the day entirely. As the officiant began the vows anew, the room shifted from shock to awe. Guests craned their necks, phones lifted, flashes popping like fireworks. Social media was already recording history. Ava's voice did not tremble. "I do." When my turn came, I said it firmly, no hesitation. "I do." The applause was not polite, it was explosive. People stood clapping, cheering, some even laughing at the sheer audacity of it all. The band struck a confused note, then rallied into music again, as though swept up in the storm. Morgan stumbled backward, nearly tripping on her gown. Her friends whispered frantically, but no one went to her side. The bet money, $16,000 pooled together, would now be collected not by her, but by the ones who had seen through her. And the reputation she had polished so carefully among her wealthy circle shattered like glass dropped on marble. Ava and I kissed not theatrically, but with the quiet finality of two people choosing truth over spectacle. Around us, the ballroom erupted once more. Morgan stood alone, her crown stolen, her bet lost, her audience turned against her. She had imagined the wedding as her victory. Instead, it became the stage for her undoing. And yet humiliation was not the end. The internet was waiting. It began before we even left the ballroom. A cousin of Morgan's had filmed the entire scene, the video of her drunken bet, my calm declaration, Ava stepping forward in her gown. Within an hour, it was clipped, captioned, and shared across TikTok, with a title that read, "Bride Loses Groom and Bet in the Same Night." By the time Ava and I signed the license in a quiet room upstairs, our phones were already buzzing uncontrollably. Friends sent screenshots, links, tags. Strangers flooded the comment sections. Some called me cold, others called me brilliant, but nearly everyone agreed betrayal had never been so publicly undone. I saw one post with over 1 million views before midnight. The caption read, "When your wedding turns into a plot twist worthy of Netflix." Another video stitched my words, "I was supposed to marry today, and I still will," followed by Ava's "I do," and set it to triumphant music. It spread like wildfire. By morning news outlets picked it up. Tabloids splashed it across digital covers. New York groom marries bride's sister after betrayal revealed. Talk shows debated whether it was cruelty or courage. One anchor chuckled. That's one way to save on catering. Morgan, meanwhile, was drowning. Clips of her confession circulated endlessly. Her voice slurred with champagne mocking me as an ATM, with feelings was played on loop. She had built her image on elegance and control. Now she was a punchline. Her employer, a luxury marketing firm, issued a statement about reputation concerns. By midweek, she was on indefinite leave. Her friends who had once raised glasses in her honor now avoided her calls. Betrayal might have been a game to them when it was hidden, but few wanted their faces associated with the viral downfall of a bride. For Ava and me, the storm was strange. We didn't seek the spotlight yet, it followed us. Our photographs, once harmless family snapshots, were dug up and shared as though people were piecing together a fairy tale. Some called us couple goals, others accused us of scheming all along. The truth lay somewhere in the quiet, two people who had both been betrayed, choosing to stand together when the world expected collapse. We tried to live normally in the days that followed. We bought groceries, cooked dinners, took walks along the Hudson, yet whispers followed, stares lingered longer, and more than once a stranger approached with a grin saying, "Aren't you that couple?" It was surreal watching our private pain become public entertainment. And yet, beneath the noise, I felt something solid. The inheritance my grandparents left me remained secure, untouched by those who would exploit it. The estate stood as it had before, but my sense of purpose had shifted. Money was no longer the weight it had been. Truth was heavier, and strangely lighter at the same time. As for Morgan, I heard through scattered messages that she moved out of state within weeks. The last I saw of her was another viral clip. Someone had spotted her at an airport sunglasses on walking quickly, phone pressed to her ear. The caption was cruel, from bride to runaway in 72 hours. Revenge had spread far beyond the walls of that ballroom. The internet had carried it to every corner. But virality is fleeting. The world was ready to move on. I, however, was not done reflecting. Because even in the noise of millions of strangers, the lesson I carried was intimate, etched into bone. The weeks after the wedding unfolded like the slow settling of dust after a building collapses. At first, there was chaos calls from reporters, strangers, sending congratulations, others spitting venom as if betrayal and revenge belonged to them. Then, little by little, the noise thinned out. What remained was quieter, sharper. Ava and I stayed in the city for a while, walking streets where whispers trailed behind us. Some saw us as brave, others as scandalous. We did not argue with either view. Truth is both were correct. Betrayal makes you many things at once, victim, judge, executioner. Morgan's family fractured. Her parents, who had always shielded her, barely left their apartment. I heard her father mutter once, "She embarrassed us before the entire city." Her mother still tried to call Ava, pleading for her to fix the family image, but Ava answered only once. "Image is all you ever cared about. I care about truth." That was the end of those calls. I returned to work eventually. Colleagues once amused by wedding chatter now tiptoed around me. They respected me in a different way, not for the inheritance, not for the job title, but for the way I had faced humiliation head-on. One senior partner pulled me aside and said, "Most men would have folded. You stood tall." I accepted the words, though they felt heavy. Standing tall is easier when anger props you up. It is harder when you are left alone with the quiet. Ava and I spent evenings in my apartment cooking simple meals, talking less about Morgan and more about ourselves. She confessed one night, "I always thought I lived in her shadow." Then I realized she casts only darkness. Her words lingered with me. Betrayal does that. It strips illusions, but it also reveals corners of truth you never noticed before. Yet despite the strange calm, I wrestled with guilt. Not guilt for exposing Morgan, but for how public it became. Her face, her voice, her downfall played on repeat for millions. Was revenge worth that scale of humiliation? Some nights I thought yes. Other nights I wondered if silence might have been more merciful. But then I remembered the folder, the receipts, the emails, the mockery. Mercy had never been part of her vocabulary. One evening, walking by the river, I found myself thinking of my grandparents again. They had survived lean years, worked through hardship, built something solid. They left me wealth not to flaunt, but to protect. I realized then that betrayal was its own kind of inheritance, one you never ask for but must carry. It teaches you painfully what money cannot buy: loyalty, respect, love, freely given. Ava squeezed my hand that night, sensing my thoughts. "You did what you had to do," she said. Her voice was steady, unshaken. "And we'll build something new out of it." I nodded. Sometimes betrayal is the most expensive education a person can pay for, and like any education, it changes the way you live afterward. But there was still one thing left unsaid, something that mattered most to me. In the quiet weeks that followed, I learned that endings are rarely sudden. They come in layers, like peeling old wallpaper one strip at a time until the bare wall is exposed. Ava and I did not rush. We knew the world still looked at us with raised brows, some calling us reckless, others calling us bold. but in the privacy of our lives we found something steady. We cooked dinners together, laughed at shows on television, and slowly, almost shyly spoke of the future. Not the loud kind of future. Morgan had always demanded grand houses, luxury trips, but the simple kind, a home where truth was the only inheritance worth passing on. A week later, an email from Morgan appeared in my inbox. The subject line read, "Forgive me." I hovered over it for a long time before opening. She wrote pages, apologies, excuses, explanations about pressure, about mistakes, about how she never thought the joke would go that far. She begged for another chance, or at least for silence, for the public humiliation to stop. I read it once, then I closed it. I did not respond. Some doors once shut should never be reopened. Months later, Ava and I had a small wedding of our own. No chandeliers, no ivory arches, no grand audience. Just a quiet garden, a handful of friends and vows spoken without rehearsal. I remember looking into her eyes and knowing that this finally was not performance. It was promise. Life did not return to normal, perhaps it never could, but it settled into something better. Strangers online eventually moved on to new scandals. The viral videos sank deeper into the archives of the internet, still there for anyone who searched but no longer buzzing in the daily feed. Sometimes walking past the river at dusk, I think about that first night, the laughter, the bet, the sting of humiliation, and I realize I am not bitter. I am grateful, because betrayal showed me what I would not accept, and revenge for all its fire cleared the ground for something new to grow. If you think I made the right choice, comment right. If you would have handled betrayal differently, share your idea. I am reading everything.